collect your flat whites and please rejoin us, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Peter Dean and Sir Angus Houston as we shift more towards the geopolitics and security challenges. Pete?
Thanks, Mike. Welcome back. It's always a tough gig being the first up after lunch. Hopefully you've eaten enough to be energetic and not enough to start having a snooze for the rest of the afternoon. Really great to have Sir Angus Houston. I think he's, like some other speakers, doesn't really need much of an introduction, but obviously being the former Chief of Defence Force in Australia and most recently, of course, one of the two independent leads of our Defence Strategic Review. And so, Angus, I want to start at the very beginning of the DSR, which is early August of 2022. And you had a press conference with Stephen Smith and the Prime Minister. And I'm actually going to read you out what you said in that press conference. You said, "Circumstances have changed dramatically over the recent past. A land war in Europe, all sorts of issues in Northeast Asia, particularly around Taiwan, the East China Sea, issues in Southeast Asia, and issues up the Himalayan border and northern India. We also have disruptive technologies coming into play. It's a fast-changing environment, and it's absolutely imperative that we review the current strategic circumstances." And then I think the front page of every newspaper later that day or the next morning said the following words, "which I rate the worst I have seen in my career and lifetime." A couple of years on, have things got any better?
Well, I don't resile from those comments I made back then, and I would submit that things have got worse. And the reason I would say that, if we were back then, the only big war running was the war in Ukraine. It had just started. We now have a war in the Middle East, a hot war in the Middle East. And what we're starting to see is an alignment of four countries: Russia, China, and of course North Korea and Iran. And what's interesting is that the North Koreans are providing 10,000 troops to the conflict in Europe. They're also supplying ammunition. We also have Iran providing drones to the Russians. In fact, the Russians are now building Iranian-designed drones in Russia. And we have China supporting Russia's wartime economy. And that wartime economy is taking 7% of Russia's GDP. So I would submit that just right at the beginning there, things are pretty grim. But then let's just take it a step further. If we have a look at where China is in the Indo-Pacific, there's been no moderation of anything to do with China. They continue to build their military forces up in a way we haven't seen since World War II, and it just keeps going and going. What's the reason for that? There's no transparency, there's no assurance, there's nothing to explain what's going on there. And then we have a look at their behaviour. We see the incidents in the South China Sea. I think they've probably, there's more of them now, and they've expanded into other areas. They've been testing the Natuna Islands off Indonesia, and there's quite a significant incident just a week ago in the Natuna Islands in the South China Sea. And of course the poor old Philippines have been taking it week after week in their part of the South China Sea. I'm also very worried about what's happening in the South Pacific. Kurt Campbell alluded to it, but I think we've got our own Australia-China competition in the South Pacific. And what I worry about is their offer to small island states for assistance with policing and so forth. One day we'll wake up and we'll find that they've had an agreement signed where they can have some sort of basing rights in somewhere like the Solomon Islands. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but we have to guard against that. and I think it's a serious challenge for Australia. I guess the other observations I'd make, with the sort of expansion of activity across the world, I think we can talk in terms of almost one theatre now. Certainly the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific are really connected now because of the activities of Iran and North Korea in particular, and also China in assisting Russia in a European war. One thing nobody has mentioned is climate change. Those countries out in the South Pacific, they are already gravely affected by climate change with the way the world is going. COP29, an incoming president from the United States who thinks climate change is a hoax, drill baby drill, and so on. So I'm really concerned about climate change. I think it's a security challenge that people rarely mention, but it is highly significant to those people in the South Pacific, and indeed I think they were dismayed at the outcome of the election because of the prospect of further global warming. China hasn't stopped. India's emitting furiously with fossil fuels, and now we have the United States committed to using as much of the fossil fuel under the United States as possible. One final point, missiles. When we did the DSR, there wasn't a lot of use of missiles, and I would put it to you that we've seen a proliferation of missiles. Even the Houthis are firing missiles against ships on that supply line between the Red Sea and Australia and what used to be called the Far East. Ships being engaged by missiles, and a number of ships have been severely damaged and a couple of them have been sunk. And then you have the war between Israel and Iran, and the use of drones and missiles, and of course we see it every day in Ukraine. So I think we need to be worrying about an adversary using missiles, and it's not just the superpowers, it's the ready availability of missiles and drones that could be available to anybody at all. So I'm very pleased to see that the National Defence Strategy 24 identifies that integrated air and missile defence, I'm talking about the full system, will be addressed in the NDS 26. I see that as an urgent requirement, and I don't think there's any backing away from it. At the moment, we need a much more robust defence in Northern Australia, particularly against the threat of incoming missiles and drones.
So that takes me to the DSR that you led with Stephen Smith, which has been translated into the NDS with the concept of national defence. It was a beautifully written document, by the way. And on that national defence concept, taking everything you've just said into account, are you confident that the strategic approach that you and Stephen recommended to government and they've adopted is still fit for purpose? Are there any particular areas that you think it needs to change, evolve and develop? And is there any impact of the US election outcomes? You've mentioned climate change is a big issue, but from the defence perspective, is there anything out of the US election that encourages you, or would need to be something that goes onto the table for the agenda around defence?
Well, one of the things we recommended was, rather than intermittent white papers, sometimes 9 years between white papers in one case, in my time, I think what we recommended in terms of biannual national defence strategies is absolutely on the money given the dynamic strategic environment that we all live in these days. Because things change. I've just mentioned some of the things that have changed in only 2 years. And clearly, missiles, this development of more and more missiles and the proliferation to even terrorist groups and them being able to use missiles, we clearly have work to do there. So that wasn't really, we mentioned it was a critical capability during the DSR, but I think it's even more urgent now. So I think that's one of the areas we have to pick up on. But in terms of the implementation of the DSR, I have to commend Defence, the CDF, the Secretary, and indeed all levels of leadership grabbed the DSR and they implemented it quickly and professionally. And of course, along the way, people like Dennis and myself, Stephen, Richard Maud and Rosemary Huxtable have been providing an oversight of the implementation in the first instance of the DSR. In the second instance, in fact, tomorrow night, we have a first oversight meeting for the NDS. And I think that's been a very powerful process. They can't hide anything from us. We do deep dives and we see what's going on, and occasionally we give them a little bit of help. Well, certainly Dennis does. The implementation, I would say, has been done very professionally. And what's really good right now, just to give you some sense of it, I mean, we're talking about when this was launched 2 years ago, and here we are, we've done the DSR, we've now got an NDS 24, and they're already working on NDS 26. And I just think that's fabulous. That's what we recommended, and they're totally committed to it. The task force that was working on the DSR implementation has morphed into the NDS division, led by Amy Hawkins, and they're doing a fabulous job.
And so I take it then we can kind of almost draw a line under the DSR process. That's done, and we are now into this biennial national defence strategy as the core of what's setting the agenda for defence in Australia.
Well, what's happened with the transition, all the open items from the DSR have been picked up in the NDS 24. And there's quite a large number of those, but again, they're going to be tracked and they'll be implemented in the fullness of time.
So AUKUS is a hot topic. We've heard from Kurt Campbell, we've heard from Mara and Heino about this, and Ambassador Rudd obviously mentioned it this morning as well. One of the key concerns about the government and the way it speaks about AUKUS, I have to say, is that it's often big on jobs, announcements around AUKUS, and arguably too little on strategy. Can I get your take of how central is AUKUS Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 to that national defence strategy in the DSR? How does it fit into that kind of strategic framework you and Stephen Smith put together? How essential is it to that, the strategy that we're attempting to implement in response to the strategic circumstances that you laid out, which are very dire?
Well, the first point I'd make is I gave a speech last week about, I guess, the election of President Trump, ANZUS and AUKUS. Let's talk about ANZUS first. It's the cornerstone of our defence policy, and we really emphasise that, as you remember, in the DSR. So that's the most important priority, is to ensure that with the transition to a new administration, we look after the wonderful alliance relationship we have with the US. In terms of AUKUS Pillar 1, I think that strengthens the relationship. Why does it strengthen the relationship? Well, we have a strategy of denial, which gives us a really good deterrent posture. To take the strategy of denial and our deterrent posture to the next stage, we need an underwater deterrent, which will cast doubt in the minds of any adversary against us. And another 8 boats, nuclear boats, in the fullness of time, in addition to what the United States already operates, and having that alliance relationship, having these additional submarines really strengthens our deterrent posture. And I think we should be thinking a lot more about deterrence, because we don't want to fight, but we want to dissuade anybody who would have a go at us from coming anywhere near us. And with nuclear-powered submarines, and particularly with the rotation through Fleet Base West of American boats and British boats from time to time, I think that really strengthens our deterrent posture.
Do you think there's any risk with the Trump administration over AUKUS? We've heard a lot of, I think, bipartisan and cross-country support. Are you of that mind as well, that the Trump administration will see this through?
I think all the points that have been made this morning are right on the money. In American inbound investment in Australia, $1.2 trillion. That's the value of the US investment in Australia. We've heard about the trade balance and $100 billion of very strong preference towards the US, very favourable to the US. And in terms of everything else, I think, well, Kevin alluded to it. We've fought together ever since Monash won that wonderful Battle of Hamel on the 4th of July 1918, and then go through the Second World War. We were saved by the Americans in the Second World War, and we fought side by side with them. So the relationship is born in blood, and we have continued to support American endeavours wherever they've been needed, right through to the present time. So I don't see anything that will be a negative when President Trump asked that question that everybody's posed earlier today. I think we come up, dare I say it, I think we come up trumps, pardon the pun. And I think he might say it would be good if you could increase your defence spending to 3.0, which, by the way, I don't think would be a bad thing for us. But that's a personal view.
All right, so we've got about a minute and a half left. I want to get you on one more thing. The most recent policy document that our government put out was the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Plan. In that plan, the relationship with the United States is at the core. It won't happen without the United States. But again, more broadly, how important in the 1 minute and 20 seconds we have left, how important is GWEO to that strategy into the future of defence? You've talked about missiles a lot, so how important is the GWEO plan?
GWEO is incredibly important, and you would remember when we looked at the Guided Weapons Explosive Ordnance during the DSR, nothing was happening, nothing. So we recommended that a 3-star officer be put in there, and I must say, Leon, Air Marshal Leon has done a wonderful job. Leon Phillips, by the way. And he and his team have basically gone exactly where we wanted them to go. We're going to be able to manufacture missiles, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and indeed the Norwegian company Kongsberg. All of them are assisting us with creating a manufacturing capability in Australia. We can't do it without the United States, but in this current environment that we live in, it's absolutely vital. We have seen how long it takes if you're going to buy a missile that's manufactured in the United States, the ones that everybody wants, the waiting list is in years. So we have got to get hold of ourselves and create the right sort of manufacturing system, the GUIO, to give us the weapons we need to defend ourselves into the future.
Well, I always make this adage, strategists like to sit alone in the dark and tell you all the bad things that are coming to you in the world. I think we fulfilled on that part early on. But obviously, strong support and optimism about the Trump administration and AUKUS, strong support for GUIO, and I think the big interesting takeaway, 3% is probably where we need to go to with defence spending. So thank you very much, Sir Angus.
And if I could take this opportunity to thank Peter for his wonderful writing. We couldn't have done it without him.